talk to me about the three forces that you see that are influencing this moment. We've got banks collapsing, US dollars under attack, looming recession. What is going on? How do we step back and think about this moment?
I look at three major forces that are happening now, haven't happened in our lifetimes, but have happened many times in history. And those three major forces are the creation of a lot of debt and the printing of a lot of money to buy that debt, particularly because the government is running large deficits. And so they don't have enough money, so that government has to print that money. So that creation of all of that debt and its financial implications and its economic implications is one force. The second force is the internal conflict, the amount of conflict that's internally, largely due to the largest wealth gaps that we've had since the 30s. And that produces populism of the left and the right, particularly when there are financial difficulties. The third force is the rising power, the challenging the existing power, largely in the form of China and to some extent Russia. So let's call it the great power conflict, because in 1945, there's this cycle. You have a war, then after a war, you have winners, and the winners determine the rules of the game. And then there's this evolution of others becoming more competitive, and then you have a conflict again for who's in control. So we have that dynamic taking place. So those three influences, the financial, the internal conflict, external conflict influences are having a dominant influence. I learned before that when I was surprised, often it was because of things that hadn't happened in my lifetime before, but happened in history. Because of that reason, I went back and studied history, the last 500 years, on these cycles. There are big cycles that last about 75 years, give or take about 50 years, and of rises and declines. And I put that out because I think it's so important people understand that. I put it out in a book called The Changing World Order and in a free video called The Changing World Order. So when we look at each one of those, they're important. I also learned in studying history that there were two other influences that were very big, and you could see them. The first was acts of nature, such as droughts, floods, and pandemics, the changes over time in the evolution over time of people's learning and the technologies they make. So I'd say there are the really five big influences that drive everything, and they are the money and debt, economic influence, the internal conflict, the external conflict, the nature influence, and the, let's call it the technology influence. So as we go now into this, it's important. Again, I put it out as a free video on YouTube so that people could see it easily. And when we get into whatever we're going to talk about, it'll be certainly in the context of those things. And since they each affect each other, it produces what I call the big cycle.
The animation that you put out in conjunction with your book, Principles for Dealing with a Changing World Order, have influenced my thinking around this moment more than anyone or anything else. It makes it seem so predictable from a historical perspective when you look at that big cycle and you see how it repeats. And so as you went through the last 500 years, one thing that you make very clear in the book is that the rise and fall of empires, the rise and fall of a reserve currency, they go in this 6-cycle trend. And the part that I always find unnerving is phase 6 is basically war and collapse. And so you have that previously dominant power loses its position, loses its status as a reserve currency, and it loses it for pretty predictable reasons in the three forces that you were talking about in the beginning, discounting the fourth force, which I don't think in every cycle you always had, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't always have a pandemic or anything like that. But the fact that we're living in a moment right now where we have all of them. And so we've got, not only is it a moment of massive technological disruption right now, good and bad, but we've got the money printing, the meme on the internet is money printer go brrr. So we've got, printing because of COVID. We've got printing coming off of printing because of the 2008 collapse. And now we're again seeing this cycle repeat itself. So I've heard you say that we're in somewhere in phase 5, which is as the empire begins to decline, as you have a rising superpower, as the debt bubble is getting out of control. With that perspective, was what happened with the SVB bank collapse, was that something that you knew, okay, something like that is coming, or was that a surprise to you?
No, it was obvious. Look, if you just I want to talk about the mechanics, really. I'm so eager to pass along an understanding of the mechanics so people themselves can do the analysis. So one man's debts are another man's assets. Okay, so what happened? The government had to sell a lot of debt. And when it sold a lot of debt, there were a lot of entities that bought a lot of bonds, government bonds. And money was very easy, which meant that short-term interest rates were very low. And money was actually being given away because they had interest-only loans and interest rates were less than 1%. And you didn't have to pay back principal. So you could go get money. And so that created a lot of debt, and it created a lot of buying of government bonds. So what happened to Silicon Valley Bank is what happened to many entities all around the world, not just banks. They what does a bank do? A bank takes in deposits, typically, or debt in some way, and then it buys debt. It can do that in the form of making a loan, or it could do that in the form of buying a government bond, buying debt. And then when interest rates went up, the value of that debt went down. The money they had to give to depositors became more and more expensive. And also depositors, wanting them to be competitive, looked at money market rates or other rates and withdrew money from the bank because they had better uses. Okay, so what that leaves them with, it's a banking problem that has happened literally for thousands of years. That what they do is the depositors, want their money back, and they're holding assets that are, in this case, have gone down in value, so they're broke.
Let me put a fine point on that. Sorry, before you move on, I don't know that people really understand this. Is this a it seems to be a necessary result of fractional reserve banking, meaning that if you deposit $10 to me, I only need to keep, and I think this is actually accurate, I only need to keep $1. And so the other $9 I can actually put to work in terms of loans to other people or investments. And that puts us in a position where, okay, technically you're giving the bank a loan. A deposit isn't just, oh, my money is in a vault somewhere. I've given the bank a loan. The bank is going to go do things with that of varying degrees of risk. In the case of SVB, They thought I'm doing the least risky thing, which is I'm buying government debt. The government is going to back it. The government, especially the US government, can actually print money if they had to cover that, which they did in this case. But if a lot of people go to the bank at the same time, known as a bank run, and say, I want all of my money, the bank goes, whoa, 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 I don't have that money. And so I have all these assets. And as long as those assets remain liquid and I can liquidate them in a timely fashion, then sure, as long as the requests for people's deposits back are coming at a reasonable rate, all is well. But when you get a lot of people coming at once and you have the investments that they've made have gone down in value, now you get a perfect storm.
Exactly. I think you said it very well. You're allowed to be in the business. Let's call it 1/10. It's actually less than 1/10 is your money.
Whoa.
But let's call it 1/10. You have a certain amount of money up. They give you the deposits. You invest the money within these general guidelines. So, for example, government bonds are safe from default. So you buy the government bonds. You think you're making a spread. And then what happens is the government bonds go down in value. At the same time as the people say, hey, I want to go take my money and put it someplace else. So you don't have enough money. And central banking works like that, except the government can print the money. So the risk, and when it's the government, is not that you won't get the money back unless, like in this particular case, for a bank, it goes down in value. So you ain't going to get that back. You're going to sell it. But anyway, you described it very well. What happens for the economy as a whole is then they print the money because they don't want defaults. There's a tolerable amount of defaults, and then you get past a tolerable amount of defaults, and it just crushes everything. And so they print the money. Okay. And so this thing with the bank is not a Silicon Valley Bank alone issue. It's not a banking issue. It is a global issue in terms of all around the world, all sorts of entities, pension funds, insurance companies, all around the world. There was a lot of the buying of these government bonds, which have gone down in value. And if you then take it and you say, what's the value of those? Those have gone down. And the cost of money is high. And so the world is leverage long, okay? Long, meaning they own stuff, and they borrowed money to own it, and it's going down in value.
How nightmarish does that scenario become? So you've got your money locked up in something for a long time, but it's declining in value. Is this like a classic moment where we can look at this big cycle and go, oh, we know where this goes, like the music has stopped, everybody, or no, it's a bit harder to judge than that?
I think it's pretty easy to judge on an intermediate or longer term basis because there's a choice, right? The predominant, the big issue is, okay, the government can come in and print the money and give money to anybody they want to give money to. But when they do that, that typically devalues the money. So think about it, if you're holding a bond, you got a claim on money, but the claims are too much. So one way or another, you're either not going to get back that money in full, or you're going to get back money that's worth less because they print the money.
Whoa. Ray, I've never heard anybody say it like that. So let me just make sure that I understood that. The government has effectively issued too many bonds, so people they're holding
and a lot of companies and a lot of other things too.
Okay, very good point. So we're not just buying the bonds from the government, we're buying corporate bonds, municipal bonds, like anybody that wants to put some debt out into the market. Government, of course. In fact, I'm actually curious, what's the ratio roughly, if you know this, between corporate debt and government debt?
Well, right now, I couldn't give you the exact number off the top of my head, but there's um, household debt, um, corporate debt, and government debt.
Yeah, that's terrifying. So even if you took every dollar that our entire country makes, I think it's true globally. If you took every dollar that we make globally and tried to pay off the debt, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, that's right, but it's not expected to pay it off in a year.
Sure.
I want to go back to my main point to make this clear. If you're holding that debt, you are holding something that money will come back. Let's say the government can print the money, but if the money's hard, if that's going to be good money that's coming back, it's going to be hard for those entities to pay back because it's a lot relative to their income and cash flows to pay it. And that means that the default risk rises. However, because you're holding that, it means that the debt will be bad one way or another. It's either bad because they don't pay it, it needs a haircut for them to pay it, or because they do pay it with money that is going to be printed to come back. So when you look at that, and that problem occurs when there's a lot of debt assets and a lot of debt liabilities. So think of it this way, just want to make this clear. When there was the position that interest rates got a lot below the inflation rate, you're losing buying power. There's no good reason to own that. And there's a change in psychology because before there was, I own bonds. The bonds go up in value as interest rates go down. So I'm getting a price appreciation, even though I'm getting, let's say a low interest rate, but inflation isn't a problem until it's a problem. Then when it's a problem, because they print so much money and they put it out, then inflation goes up and a light bulb goes off. That light bulb used to be, okay, how much am I earning? Okay, I'm not earning much, but it's okay. The price of the bond or whatever's gone up, but anyway, I'm holding it and it's safe. And then people realize it's not safe because I'm losing money to inflation. So now you have the central bank wanting to rectify that imbalance by, real interest rates were minus 1.7%.
Meaning that inflation was chipping away at your buying power.
Yes, if I look at inflation index bonds as an indicator, or other indicators, I'm losing percentage points to inflation by holding that bond. And then when and people realize that, well, you don't want to do that. And then the other side of it was you want to buy and borrow and buy stuff because, money's free. So companies borrow and buy stuff and individuals borrow and buy houses because interest only loans on the houses. I mean, like, okay, I can buy a house, I can buy an apartment. And so, but that creates the imbalance where it's terrible to be a lender and a creditor, and it's good to be a borrower and do that. So that imbalance takes place. It produces inflation, and then when it produces inflation and so on, and then you say, I don't want to own these things anymore, And then, and also the Federal Reserve says, I better fight inflation. They change things. And so by raising interest rates to levels in which it goes from minus 1.7% in inflation index bonds to plus 1.7%, and it makes it, and it raises the short-term interest rates, real interest rates much higher, then lo and behold, all the people who did all those things get hurt. Okay, they borrowed, they bought the bonds, they bought all of those things and all of those debt instruments. And also companies, look at the companies that are affected. Because yields got so low, tech companies and others, those who have a dream, they don't have to necessarily make profits. They're selling a dream, and the money's got to be invested. And so you see all of that change radically when that tightening of monetary policy. So now you sit there and have a lows. So when you're looking at the big picture, think of it as all like banking. You're holding all these financial assets. What is the value of a financial asset? It has no intrinsic value. Its only value is what it can buy. But there are many, many more financial assets out there. The most financial assets out there that there's ever been relative to the value of stuff to buy. There's too many claims out there. It's like musical chairs. Okay, if everybody says, "Oh, wait a second, let me get my stuff. Let me convert my debt assets. And I want to get my stuff. I want to get real stuff." That's a real problem. And so that's the global picture on the first of those 5 influences, right? The fact that it's happening with the other influences is very important because they affect each other. So this financial picture, by the way, is the same as in the 1930 to 45 period, and the same as they were throughout history.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today. Yeah. For people that don't know, that's World War II. Just to
it started with a financial crisis that then caused internal conflict. What do we do about the financial crisis? The populism of the left and populism of the right in this internal fighting. And 4 countries that were democracies chose not to be democracies because of the conflicts that were existing. And those countries were Germany, Italy, Spain, and Japan, because there's a lot of internal conflict over wealth when you have that. And so that creates a lot of internal disorder, a lot of fighting, okay? In some ways, almost civil war forms everywhere, some form of civil war. Who wins the internal war? And of course, that happens also at the same time as there's the external conflict. So first of all, everybody's fighting over resources. You have populists come to power, and the populists are not compromisers the way democracies work.
Yeah, let's fight. I'm going to fight for you. Don't worry. I'm not in the middle. I'm not going to compromise.
And you've got to pick a side. And so the moderates, there's no place for moderates. You've got to pick a side. And the sides are, let's say, internally in the country, the left and the right, and externally, I don't know, the Americans and the Chinese, or the Americans, okay, and you got to pick a side and fight. And so that becomes the dynamic that is these periods of time. And these periods of time have typically lasted about 10 to 15 years. And they have various symptoms to it. So in the book, I write out, there's like a disease, like a cancer. You see stage 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have these things, you could look at it and you could diagnose, and you see it moving from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 and to 6. You could see that taking place. And each time you come closer to a bad set of circumstances, bad financial circumstances, and bad fighting over things.
Yeah, so this is where this gets really breathtaking. So you've talked a lot about this idea that there are things, you even mentioned at the beginning of this episode, there are things that have not happened in our lifetime, but they happen over and over and over. And so it is very easy for me as somebody born in the 70s to think, oh, war isn't a thing that happens in the US, it's something that happens elsewhere. Populism isn't something that happens in the US, it's something that happens elsewhere. But it does happen. We're seeing it ratchet up right now because of that. I heard you once say, and I think this is really important for people to understand about the internal conflict. In fact, you and I bumped into each other in Dubai, and I was saying, Ray, as given everything that's going on, how do I think? How do I think about where to live, whatever? And you said, Tom, the only thing that matters is how people are with each other. And for whatever reason, it really hit me that time what you meant by that. And I understood the importance of this conflict. And what I heard you say previously is that in the French Revolution, it was the moderates that got the guillotine. It's like you are forced, because I consider myself very centrist in nature, and you find yourself, as things escalate, being forced to take a side, which the French Revolution one gave me pause. I was like, not how I would want to end up as a moderate. Really fast, going back to that this is a global moment. It's a predictable part of the process. That stage 5, the debt is too much. Interest rates are now going up to keep inflation from running away. We printed money like crazy. You've got the rise in conflict. When we printed money, when the Fed printed money to backstop what looked like it was going to be a potential contagion from SVB, obviously, I think there were 5 banks that ended up failing. Is this now contained, or is what the Fed did just going to forestall something that's inevitable?
The dominoes are beginning to fall. I mean, okay, you know what the next dominoes are, and you can imagine the dominoes. So, for example, they're not going to buy the debt. A lot of them are not. Those who bought the debt and have too much debt and have debt losses on government debt are not going to buy buy more of that debt, for example, and therefore, when the government sells more of the debt, there's not going to be an adequate number of buyers for that debt. You know that those who are hurting because they have those losses won't make loans, and a lot of those loans went to real estate, particularly commercial real estate. And you know that for various reasons in commercial real estate, that we don't use it the same way and so on. So you're going to have problems in commercial real estate. You know that this kind of money was also financing venture capital and private equity entities that also have cash flow problems, challenges. And so you know that funding is not going to be there in the same way. you know, as a result of these things, that a number of entities will cut costs and in their various ways. And so depending on that, the job market is changing. And you see it, for example, in tech jobs and other, if you're in some of those areas that are getting squeezed, and you see the same thing by and large, happening internationally. So you can see also that if you said, what is the value of those assets that are being held, that value has gone down a lot. And because it was bought on leverage, as you described, because it is bought on leverage, there are bad losses in different places. And then the question is, what are you going to do with those losses? In most cases, quite often, they're, don't mark them to the market, meaning don't account for them and recognize those losses, which is kind of, let's say, hiding those losses and hoping in time that they'll just over time, it'll be fine. But that'll produce a squeeze, that'll produce a problem. So I think we know those things. We know those things. And that's happening at the same time as we have an internal conflict taking place, such as the presidential election. So we're going to come into the presidential, and it's not just presidential election. Of course, it's a number of senators, congressmen, and so on, and who are at each other's throats about this, and who are going to fight with each other. Okay, and fight to win, not probably respect the rules as much, but fight to win for their side. And that's happening at the same time as we have the situation with China, most importantly, China and Russia, in terms of the issues, in terms of their things to fight over. For example, even there's going to be an election in Taiwan that'll also have a big bearing on this whole thing. So there's, we know, I think, pretty much that we're going to have financial problems and economic problems at the same time as we have this internal fighting and this external risky situation.
You're at a stage in